Excellencies, colleagues and friends, welcome. It's a true pleasure to be here with all of you today as we gather to explore and discuss a topic of significant importance to all of us. The economic impact refugees from Ukraine have had so far on the Polish economy. I would also like to express my gratitude to all of those connected online for their interest into this topic. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Diogo Cabral. I'm the Senior Economic Inclusion Officer for UNHCR in Poland, and I'm delighted to guide you through today's event. I would also like to extend our sincere appreciation to Deloitte for their tremendous efforts and commitment throughout this study. Their dedication has been instrumental in shaping the depth and quality of the insights we are about to explore today. Now, to outline the flow of our event. We will commence with introductory remarks by Kevin Allen, Refugee Coordinator and UNHCR representative, who will set the stage for today's discussions. Following that, Christiane Goyer, UNHCR Deputy Representative, will provide us essential insights into the protection context. Later on, Alexander Lashek, Senior Manager at Deloitte, will present a study. Following the presentations, we'll then open the floor for questions and answers from participants here with us, encouraging an interactive discussion. Once we conclude the formalities, I invite each one of you to join us outside for some refreshments, providing a further opportunity to a meaningful exchange. So, without further ado, let's proceed with the program for today, and it's my pleasure to pass the word to Kevin, UNHCR representative.
Thanks very much, Diogo, and really pleased to be here with Alexander Leszek from Deloitte. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, friends, and colleagues, as many of you know, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, my agency, was born out of the tragedy of World War II. And indeed, as we gather here today in the city of Warsaw, we're at the historic epicenter of that tragedy. If we fast forward to 1991, in the early days of democracy in Poland, one of the first international treaties that Poland ratified was the 1951 Refugee Convention, perhaps not surprisingly. But few could have imagined in 1991 that 31 years later, Poland would be at the epicenter of the largest exodus of refugees in Europe since World War II. 90% of the refugees pouring across the borders were women and children, many with little more than the clothing on their backs and the bags in their hands. But at this critical moment in time, in history, Poland stood up and stepped up to honor its commitments under the 1951 Refugee Convention, but at the same time, to quickly implement the provisions of the Temporary Protection Directive that was promulgated by the European Union. What did that mean? It meant that those women and children pouring across the border immediately had access to health care, to education, to social benefits, and importantly, they had the right to work and to start business. And as you will hear today in the study from Deloitte, female refugees, women, were a major part of the driving force that you will hear outlined in this report showing the economic impact of refugees in Poland. Now, as we sit here today, as I stand here today, we are over 2 years since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. 10 million people are forcibly displaced from their homes as I speak. And I want us to think about that figure, 10 million people. That's roughly the population of Greece or Portugal, forced out of their homes because of persecution and conflict. 6 million refugees in Europe, 4 million internally displaced in Ukraine, and here in Poland, almost 1 million refugees remain, Poland having received millions more in the initial days and months of the emergency. As we look to the east and as we look to the future, the situation is complex. And I think it's fair to say that at this point in time, peace seems elusive. But I have not come here today to tell you a story of despair, but instead a story of hope and of the triumph of the human spirit and of solidarity. And I'm going to do that with the help of our friends from Deloitte, an internationally recognized and prominent audit, accounting, and financial services firm, which is going to show you with hard data and with analysis how refugees in Poland have made a major and positive impact to the economy. It's a story that shows us how when a host country like Poland extends its arms, opens its heart, and receives refugees, when you couple that with the strength and resilience of refugees, in this case Ukrainian refugees, and you add the ability to work and to start businesses, it is a powerful combination. And I think you are going to be struck, perhaps surprised by some of the findings in this study that we have done with Deloitte. To give you just a few of the highlights, and I won't go into the details because Alexander will be doing that in a few moments, by taking the policy decision that it took to allow refugee women primarily to work and to start small businesses, in a matter of 2 years, we have seen striking levels of employment in the Polish economy, Ukrainian refugees working, paying taxes, paying into the Social Security Fund, starting small businesses in rather striking numbers, and you'll hear more about that. And the end result of this, if we look at the end of 2023, this study shows quite clearly that the Ukrainian refugee population in Poland has generated 1% of the gross domestic product of Poland, 1% of the GDP. This is rather astonishing and something that we ourselves as UNHCR did not know, and we're very pleased to learn about this. And I think you'll be intrigued and moved by the study that Deloitte has done. Ultimately, what this means from our vantage point as the UN Refugee Agency is that by taking the right policy approach, empowering refugees, and linking up with the private sector, we see a tremendous investment in human capital for the future. The human capital of refugees who are contributing now to Poland and who will continue to contribute, I have no doubt, but also the potential to contribute to Ukraine. When the conditions are right and when refugees decide to return, when it's safe to return, you have a tremendous pool of resources and talent and energy and resilience that can contribute to the reconstruction of Ukraine. Now, in the interim, some refugees may choose not to go back. And currently, the situation is not conducive to UNHCR promoting returns. But this does not mean that they cannot contribute even from Poland by generating revenue here, protecting their assets, being ready to return, perhaps supporting family members who were not able to leave Ukraine. So this is a win-win for Poland and for Ukraine. And I think that the way I would characterize this really is a story of hope. In a situation at a crossroads in history where it is difficult to see the end game, it is difficult to see the light at the end of the tunnel sometimes, this study, and more importantly than this study, the Ukrainian refugees who are here give us hope. At the same time, this is not a story without some complication or complexity. We still know that a substantial percentage of refugees in Poland are vulnerable. They face special risks. They are in the margins. I'm talking about women who may have endured severe psychological trauma in flight, young children who may be unaccompanied or separated from parents, the elderly, and a number of other categories of individuals who may face special risks. So they're going to need our continued support. At the same time, there are challenges and risks in the labor market itself. I won't go into great detail on this, but at this stage, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague and my friend, Christine Goyer, who will tell us a bit more about that and other aspects of the study.
Good morning, everyone. So indeed, today we'll hear about that story of hope, the story of refugees who managed to get back on their feet quickly, to work, to contribute to the economy, and that's a very important story to tell, because often we hear a different story of refugees being a burden for societies, for the abusing sometimes the system, the social benefit system, and I think it's going to be very interesting to hear that other side of the story. But as Kevin said, there's not just one story. I think it would be oversimplifying as just one or the other. I think there are many stories in any situation like the one in Poland. And I think all these stories have to be told at the same time in their full complexity. So while we will be hearing about the maybe more positive and the more success stories, we'll also hear about some of the challenges. And I just want to highlight some of those as invited by Kevin. There's, the story of refugees who are not doing well or not back on their feet for various reasons, who are far away from the labor market and who might never actually get there. So you have amongst the population elderly who are the pensioners, retirement age, they will not work. You have families with single moms who have no child support and they will not be able to work immediately. You have people who have medical conditions, disabilities, they will not be able to work and they might never be. So this category needs additional support, targeted support, and our job, I would say, as maybe all of us in the room, but particularly for us UNHCR, is only done when those people are not left unsupported. And this is really the work we're trying to do now. We've always tried to do, but continuously with the government, with the authorities, to make sure these people have adequate support, safety nets are included in the social safety nets to make sure they're not left on the margin, because this is really a category that, if left unattended and unsupported, will really continue to face a lot of difficulties. Additionally, I think we cannot underestimate the needs in terms of psychological support. As you know, and as you can appreciate, the needs for psychological support, mental health needs are huge, and sometimes it's a huge obstacle and challenge for people to fall back on their feet and be able to function back into society. On the other hand, we also have refugees who are far away from the labor market. They can work, but they need more support because they don't speak the language very well. They need targeted language learning, for instance. They also need to maybe reskill, upskill. There's also a conversation we've been having. So they have more chances to go back to closer to the labor market, but also need targeted support from the private sector, from the humanitarian community, and from the government of Poland. And this is some of the work we are doing. The other story, we don't speak too much, and we will not be speaking too much about it, but I would not be in my role if I was not talking about other refugees, not just refugees from Ukraine, but refugees from other nationalities that are present in Poland for many years, from very different countries. And you might be surprised to know, but refugees with protection in Poland, who have been granted protection in Poland, have access to the labor market, and with no particular formalities to do, but they also face similar challenges, and sometimes they are discriminated against because they come from different backgrounds. They might not be speaking Polish very well. They come from different cultures or religion, and it's equally important for us to fight for them and to work with them to make sure they're also integrated in Poland. So on the inclusion front, we have a lot of opportunities, obviously, and this is what we'll be focusing on today. But we should also not forget the challenges that are compelling, but also a call for action. And we've seen a lot of commitment from all of you who you're representing today, but also many others who've been, trying to adjust their their business model to include more refugees, because as Kevin said, it's a win-win story for all. So just wanted to highlight some of that as I pass the floor to Alexander to tell the very nice positive story today. Thank you.
Good morning. As a Deloitte, we were commissioned to estimate the impact of refugees on Polish economy. We reviewed available data, and as you can imagine, it was quite often incoherent because different data sources were giving different numbers. We used state-of-art economic modeling techniques to put it into one piece, all the data from different sources, review the literature to come to estimate of the impact of refugees. From the beginning, we knew that this impact will be huge. As it was already mentioned, at least at the moment, almost 1 million refugees in Poland were present in Poland. How many of them are working? Between 220,000 when we use the most strict social security data, or even 350,000 when we look at the surveys. Why the disparity? Because social security, which is the official, the most coherent data source, does not cover all the jobs. So there are people who are working but are not covered by social security, and this is this bigger number. So, in my presentation, I will start with the reviewing the number of refugees that are working. Then I will move to their productivity. I will describe the model we have used to model not only their impact as workers, entrepreneurs, but also as consumers and taxpayers. And later we'll give the final result and discuss it in the light of other available research. As we all know, the inflow of the refugees was really huge. The line shows the net border crossing between Poland and Ukraine, but as you are aware, Poland is an entry country to EU, and many of those people moved forward. The best official data we can get is PESEL registration, but here also there was a change in the rules as people who are moving out of Poland started to be deregistered. At the moment, we can talk about almost 1 million people still in Poland. What is most obvious that those are mainly women and children. Working age men stayed in Ukraine, and what was also already mentioned, many of households have special needs. So those are rather vulnerable groups that entered Poland. They entered labor market that was really overheating. Polish society is aging rapidly. There were some statistical changes, so we don't have exact numbers, but we can say that during the last 15 years, working age population of Poles declined by nearly 3 million. So on the one hand, we have aging population, on the other hand, growing economy, which led to one of the lowest unemployment rates in EU. And as you can see, the number of companies looking for candidates, even during the COVID, was quite significant. So the labor market was hot when the refugees entered. Fortunately, our government opened labor market immediately, which was great move both for refugees but also for the economy. As you can see, the state of the economy played a quite significant role. On the horizontal axis, you have female unemployment rate in domestic country, while female because majority of refugees were female. On the vertical axis, you have employment rate of refugees. Please note that the way in which figures on employment rate are collected between countries can differ a little bit. So those are not exact numbers, but still it stands out that in Poland the entrance into labor market was really successful, and the state of labor market really helped. Again, as it was mentioned, remember about the missing 50 or 40% that are still out of the labor market. When we are looking at the macroeconomy, it's great that so many people are working. But still, we have to cater for those who have special needs and still need some support to enter job market or other support, because as it was mentioned, not everyone can, it is not plausible that everyone will work. When we're looking at macroeconomic impact, one thing is how many people are working. The second thing is how productive is their work. Oh, and one more thing. This is an important takeaway. When we look at the number of people working, we use UNHCR survey data to estimate that majority of income of refugees in Poland is currently from their work. About 4/5 of their income is from their own work. Again, majority can sustain themselves, but still we have to remember about those that cannot. Nevertheless, social security and other support is much less important than work. So on the one hand, we have a quite huge number of working people, and now let's discuss what is their productivity. Here the picture is mixed. On the one hand, Ukrainian refugees are very well educated. They are better educated than Polish average. They are better educated than Ukrainian average. So we have overrepresentation of the most representative people from Ukraine. On the other hand, unfortunately, currently in Poland they are working primarily in elementary occupations, which means that they are working below their skills. There are other factors to discuss when we are talking about productivity. On those graphs, you have Polish powiats sorted by average monthly gross earning. Gross earning can be used as a rough proxy of productivity, because in those areas of the country where the productivity is higher, usually wages are higher as well. And as you can see, refugees are overrepresented in the biggest cities. For example, in Warsaw, there's around 10% of working refugees, far more than around 6% of Poles. So it means that the refugees were drawn to those labor markets where labor productivity is really high. So on the one hand, they have better education. They are concentrated in the cities where the productivity is higher. But on the other hand, they are working in less productive industries. They are working in smaller companies. And they are doing elementary jobs at the moment. So the picture is, I would say, mixed. Building on this, we started our modeling. We used a computable general equilibrium model to account not only for their impact as workers, but also as consumers, taxpayers, entrepreneurs, to have the full view how economy adjusted to this inflow of workers. I think that it's important to stress here this consumption part, because besides the income refugees receive from the work, they also have income from Ukraine. They are spending their saving, so they are spending more in Poland than their work alone would indicate. As I mentioned, there are discrepancies in data, so we came up with 4 scenarios. In case of employment, we assumed the most conservative social security number that does not account for all the jobs, those jobs that do not need social security registration, and the number from surveys which is much higher. In terms of productivity, we assumed either productivity that is equal to domestic workers or that is at about 10% less. As I mentioned, there are factors working both ways, so here the picture is unclear. what is really important that we omitted impact on productivity of domestic workers. We know from other crises, we know from the research on both refugees but also on migration, that inflow of foreign workers can have impact on productivity of domestic workers. As new people are entering the labor market, in standard setup, we can expect more competition for jobs, lower wages. This is standard setup. But then when we look at the data, this is not what we see. We see that as migrants are entering labor market, usually domestic wages are not falling. Why? Because domestic people can shift to more productive jobs, can specialize. This can take the different ways. Those are well-educated native women that have better access to childcare. Those are domestic workers who are moving up in the company. Those are domestic workers that are moving toward jobs where native language is an asset. So initial results from Poland by Gromadzki and Lewandowski are indicating that probably this is also happening in Poland. We don't see negative impact on of refugees on wages. This is too early to say more about this, but taking into account more people on labor market, which would mean more competition, something else is happening there, and this is probably this uplift in domestic productivity. This is something that we will have to look in a few years. So, taking our, with all these assumptions, we move to the modeling. As a result, we see that in 2023, GDP increased between 0.7 to 1.1%, and more probably the higher upper range is more plausible. As I mentioned, in standard modeling, more people mean more competition on the labor market, so the unemployment rate would probably go a little bit higher, but as I mentioned, it doesn't take into account this higher productivity. Nevertheless, higher unemployment rate and a little bit slowdown in real wages in the environment of high inflation was not something that was really bad for Polish economy. As I mentioned, our economy was already overheating. And please note that general government income increased more than GDP. Why so? Because as I mentioned, refugees are spending more than natives compared to their wages. This is due to lower saving rate. They are not saving, they are spending what they have, and they are also spending their savings, they are spending income they are receiving from abroad. For example, besides people who are working in Poland, there are people who are working abroad. They are hard to account in data, how this income is treated, but there are people who are spending money they receive on their Ukrainian bank account, and then they are spending this in Poland. So, as a result, tax revenues are between 14.7 to nearly 20 billion PLN higher in 2023, which is an enormous sum. We don't have clear account how much Poland spent on the initial support for refugees, because the money was spent by both central government, local government, private sector, and we don't have clear picture, but available estimates by officials are indicating that this tax revenue in 2023 is already higher than initial outlays. As a sanity check, we always like to look how our results compare to other studies, because it helps us to check whether we are not omitting something. There were several studies looking at the impact of Ukrainian workers, both refugees and previous studies looking at migrants. We adjusted results from those studies to be comparable by adjusting the number of workers. And as you can see, our results are quite conservative. Other studies are rather showing even higher number, and most probably due to this productivity shock, something that is happening already, but we don't have enough data to be able to estimate it exactly. So, taking this all together, we see that refugees had huge positive impact on Polish GDP, and this impact will only grow over time as economy adjusts, people are moving toward jobs that are better matching their skills. But nevertheless, we cannot forget about those who are still outside of the labor market. Those that have the best skills are already working. Now we have to care for those that are more vulnerable and require more support. So, to sum up, refugees to a large extent are supporting themselves. They have huge impact on Polish GDP, huge positive impact on Polish GDP, and in particular, public finances in Poland benefited enormously from their work. I think those are three main takeaways. Maybe I can only add that compared to other countries, Poland, this employment rate in Poland is really high. But please remember about those that are still outside of the labor market, and this is the work that still needs to be done. I think that now we can move to the questions and answers.
Dzień dobry, ja mam...
Good morning. I have 6 or 7 questions, and I will ask my questions in Polish. If you can, please take your notes. Yes, I'm taking my my notebook.
Że podzielę się notesikiem? Dobra. To tak, po pierwsze...
So my first question, the difference in the estimation of refugees employed, 130,000 refugees, they are employed in the so-called grey economy. That's why we do not have the social contributions. The second question, 56% of refugees with higher education levels. Does it also cover the specialist category? It's a bit lower than the bachelor degree, so specialist degree lower than bachelor. Number 3, no competition for work, since refugees opt for jobs which require lower skills. Have you checked whether within those low-skilled jobs is there a competition? Because we think there is a competition among those low-skilled, low-paid jobs, which may increase the anti-Ukrainian approach of certain Poles who compete for those less stable jobs, less paid jobs. Number 4, since many people are excluded due to the fact that they do not speak Polish, have you thought about estimating the potential return on investment for this scenario where we finance Polish language courses from public funds? Many people could enter the labor market then, and that could translate into a better returns for the Polish state and its budget in the long term. Next question, Social Security Authority and their data, ZUS. Could ZUS single out refugees from Ukraine? Or maybe the analysis pertains to all the Ukrainians? Could they single out the refugees as such? Because I do not know whether the Social Security Authority can decide who is a Ukrainian migrant and who is a Ukrainian refugee in fact. And my final question, the impact of working Ukrainians on the GDP. It translates into taxes and into social contributions. But have you compared it versus the costs that were borne by the public budget? The offer of accommodation, social benefits offered to Ukrainians. Have we already trumped the expenses borne by the Polish budget?
As the disparity between surveys and the social security data is concerned, it's not only due to shadow economy. Those are, for example, umowy o dzieło that does not require social security registration. Those are people working remotely in Ukraine. Those are people helping their family members running a business. I think that there are also other types of contracts than only umowa o dzieło that also does not require social security. So shadow economy is there as well, but definitely it's not the only factor. As far as competition among low-skilled workers is concerned, this was not part of our assignment, so we used work by Lewandowski to see overall impact without going into details about particular job categories. Nevertheless, we reviewed literature on the impact of migration in other countries. This is not exactly the same because this was migration, not only refugees, but still literature review was ambiguous. There were some, about half of the works were showing negative impact on low-skilled workers, about half of the works were showing no impact or positive impact. So I understand that there is sentiment, but I think that at the moment we don't have that much hard data to show that it's really the case. In terms of return on education, I can only refer to our previous study when it was done at the beginning of the crisis, when we were looking at different policy options. At the moment, then we were looking at different ways how to encourage people to enable people to enter labor force. Also looking at the language skills and investment in this area. At the moment, I don't remember whether there were estimates of the returns, but please note that overall estimate if all the people were in the labor market and their productivity would go up, then this positive impact on the economy would be much higher. I don't think that there was a decomposition between language skills, job matching, and other public interventions. So this was the third question. Regarding costs of the support, unfortunately, we are not aware of publicly available throughout complete data, how much have we spent. There are data by OECD that are some estimates. They are a little bit higher than those quoted by PFR and Mr. Boris, who was, I think, closest to official data as Polish official that was engaged in the support. There were estimates by Polish Institute of Economic Affairs. Majority of those figures were pointing to a number a little bit lower than this cost of the support. Of course, at the moment we have to think about the outlays we are spending at the refugees now due to their access to education, healthcare and social security. But please remember about one thing. When you look at the public finance, the biggest spending per person is due to pensions. And those are people who are not receiving pensions. So, at least from Polish system. So, most probably their impact is positive. We can discuss how big this positive number is, but net impact is positive.
Thank you. We have another question here.
Hi, Piotr Iwanowski, IBS. Hi, Alexander. Very nice talk. I have a couple of questions, mostly on your modeling, to be honest. So could you be please a little bit more specific? How do you actually model the labor market in CGE? I understand you have homogeneous labor there, so there's no like skill differentiation. So you introduce it as a general labor supply shock. Do you sort of like try to make the shock some kind of like a sector specific, or is it a general labor supply shock?
General labor supply with adjustment for productivity of all the population weighted by the share of the refugees. So we lower the overall productivity because the composition on the labor market changed with the inflow of those people with lower productivity.
All right, so the wage effect that you showed, the wage effect is kind of like negative, or around minus 1%. Should we interpret that as a compositional effect? Because like the mass of people in low-paid job increases, so that reduces the average? Or is it more like the equilibrium effect? Is it the impact on the natives' wages or all workers, which suddenly include like 1 million refugees?
On all workers, as far as number of workers, it's not 1 million, but 300,000. And this is a rather equilibrium impact, because even in those setups where we have no negative shock on productivity, it was still visible.
Okay, so then it's kind of, then the question is, how do you estimate the elasticity of wages to labor supply shock? Because that kind of contradicts like the econometric results we had with Jan in the paper you cited, where we show the impact of the women refugee employment on Polish women wages. We found nothing. So I think that's...
Yes, and I think that the missing factor that we cannot estimate was the uplifting of Polish worker productivity. So as a result, I think that the net average productivity went up.
Okay.
So we didn't want to make this assumption because it's far-going. We wanted to be conservative, but I think that the quite plausible scenario is when you calibrate model in such a way to receive no impact of wages, coherent with what you see in your work.
Okay, so the final short one. Do you have any sector-specific results, like the impact on employment and wages by sector?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Or I'm not aware, but as far as I remember, it was aggregated.
Okay, I got the mic, so I will ask the question. Anita Rink, IKEA, as the company, we have special programs for refugees also from Ukraine, including the language courses. But this is, today I would like to ask two clarification questions. I'm not an economist, so it's hard for me to understand everything what you said. One question is about the GDP. You said it's between 0.9% GDP. What does it mean? Is it percent of GDP, or is it percentage points? So if we have, let's say, next year a 3% of GDP growth, so how much of, how to understand these figures? And the second question, on the slides you said very quickly something about 10% of Ukrainians in Warsaw. I didn't get, what did you mean? What was this 10% about?
Okay.
Thank you.
So regarding the first question, this is the impact on levels. We had GDP growing by some rate, and then there was a shock, and we are on a higher rate. So when the Polish economy will grow by 3% next year, it will be 3% times 1.01. So this is something that stays with us permanently. Of course, as I mentioned, this impact is even growing over time as economy adjusts, but those figures are not changing. The change is not huge. I think it's growing from 1.1 to 1.35 over 10 years as the economy adjusts. So this is permanent uplift of Polish GDP. And regarding employment, we looked at the distribution of both native and refugees between cities, or rather powiats. On vertical axis, you have share of refugees in given powiat. So we have about 6% of refugees in Wrocław, about 10% in Warsaw, less than 2% in Poland. The whole population of refugees here and the whole population of Polish workers here. So the main takeaway is that refugees are far more concentrated, or rather working refugees, in bigger cities than Poles are. And this is something really good for their productivity. Yes?
Thank you very much. My name is Anna Karaszewska. I represent Jobs First. We are providing employment programs for those who are far from the labor market, and actually at the moment we are contracted by UNHCR, and we are providing employment program for Ukrainian refugees who are in a collective shelters at the moment. And I have a question clarifying your presentation. Am I right that majority of the companies who or employers who employ Ukrainian refugees are small and medium-sized companies rather than big ones?
I'm not sure. When we were looking at these productivity figures, we compared structure of Poles and Ukrainians. So, for example, when we look at the education, we compared share of higher education in Poland and the higher education in Ukraine. Sorry, I forgot this question about education. I think we write about this in the report because we know that there were some discrepancies, and there are also different surveys that were giving different results, but overall result that this education is a little bit higher than Poles holds in every interpretation and every survey. And returning to your question, this only means that the percentage of refugees working in smaller companies is higher than for natives. I don't remember at the moment which is it. Does it mean it is majority or 30% or 50%? But still, it's higher than in case of Polish companies.
Okay, so I just want to add that from our experience, because we were providing together with Confederation Leviathan the pilot program for Ukrainian refugees coming to Poland during the first year of the war, and now for UNHCR, for those who are far from the labor market, that majority of companies who employ are SMEs actually.
Okay. Honestly, we were surprised by those results. When we were in contact, for example, with big retailers, we expected that big companies will be overrepresented. But then when we look at the survey data, it turned out that is other way around.
Hello, my name is Mirosława Kerek, Ukraiński Dom. I have a question a bit to follow in this question. We also do the employment programs, but also we were studying the employment conditions of Ukrainian migrants pre-war, full-scale war. And we had many people who were employed via temporary working agencies. And in your case, did you have kind of what is the picture of that, whether they are employed directly or via, and whether it also affects the salaries they get? Because usually when they were employed by temporary agency, the salaries were not so high. And whether also, because we also are concerned about the working conditions, and so maybe, I know it's not your research, but still, do you see it?
No, and this was also challenging for us, this estimate of wages, because different sources were giving different numbers. Also, there were differences in net and gross wages, but we didn't have data that helped us to explicitly look at the agencies. And returning to one previous questions regarding people registered in Social Security. There was a special publication by Social Security that looked at people who registered in Social Security after the war that were not insured before the war, to make it simple. So it was not directly related to UKR registration as far as I can remember, but they were looking at people who were newly registered. And of course, this is the problem that we came across in the study many times, to distinguish between refugees and previous migrants. For example, as far as concentration in productive sectors is concerned, we don't have data exactly for refugees. So we were able to look how it changed compared to the pre-war situation. Yes. No. No, just Ukrainian nationality, but as I mentioned, it was special ZUS publication. I think that my colleague can explain more in details later, because we were also in correspondence with Social Security to...
Any other questions?
Alexander, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very, very interesting. A lot of data. Olga Sherbina from International Finance Corporation. I have a question about companies opened by refugees. And so this is one of the contributions that refugees are making in Polish economy. In the course of your study, did you come across any data on the, more recent data on the number of companies opened by refugees? What kind of companies? What are the sectors? If you could share, that would be great.
We haven't modeled that explicitly because, as I already mentioned, the model is looking at the overall impact of workers and entrepreneurs and so on. I remember that we quote the number of companies registered by Ukrainians, but still this part is a little bit tricky because quite many highly educated Ukrainians are still working, for example, for Ukrainian companies. Or they moved and work here, but still receive pay in a Ukrainian bank account. There were some shifts in this. In the report, we have analysis of the spending from Ukrainian credit cards. From the national accounts perspective, those people seem somehow like export of tourist services. So those are people that are producing somewhere else, but spending in Poland. But this effect is maybe not fading away, but is smaller than it used to be.
Dzień dobry, Tatiana Goman, Polsko-Ukraińska Izba Gospodarcza. Ja mam pytanko, przepraszam.
My question in Polish. This figure of those employed, 300,000, that's refugees employed in the Polish system. So it doesn't account for people who work in Ukraine or in foreign companies, although they stay in Poland.
People, this figure is based on a survey. So we have the percentage of working people from the survey, and then we multiply this by the population.
Any more questions? I don't see anyone, so yes, of course.
I just wanted to make a bit of self-promotion, sorry. But you quoted the MSNA, so that's called the Multi-Sectoral Needs Assessment that UNHCR conducted over the summer last year. And it's now available online, the analysis, particularly the economic part, which, I mean, it's a small sample, so it's not that detailed, but I think it's quite useful because it goes through some of this information about the type of employment, the sectors that people are employed in, and it also shows the articulation of people receiving or benefiting from their work and those from social protection and social services, which is very low in the sample we've used. And that's a quite extensive sample. In our understanding is 13,000 individuals. So I don't know, maybe we can project it or circulate it, but I was going through the presentation yesterday and I still find a lot of very important information on the economic side, but also on accommodation and other type of important features of the inclusion of refugees. So I just wanted to flag because for those of you who will go through the report, you will see a lot of this reference, UNHCR, MSNA. So just to say there's a bit more information on that for those of you who want, and it's publicly available on the refugee portal. But if you're not aware, we're happy to recirculate that one form or the other. That's all. Thank you.
Building on that, I would add that this is one of the best data sources we had, because there are quite many surveys on the market, but usually samples are even lower, and MSNA was really comprehensive and quite coherent with other data. We know about huge uncertainty, but here this level of coherency was really good.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, maybe. Thank you so much, Alex. So we come to an end of our presentation, and I'm quite excited about the questions and all the dynamic that was created. Here you can download the study. I'm going to pick up on what Christine was saying, and I'll write an email to everyone with all the links of the MSNA and the special sectorial analysis that we have for the different sectors. So expect that today in your mailbox. And now we invite you to have some refreshments and continue the discussion and questions just outside the hall. So thank you very much for coming, for your presence. Thank you.